if gold doubles from here, Bitcoin will triple or quadruple or quintuple or something.
The following is for information purposes only and should not be used as the basis of an investment decision. This is not investment advice. Dominic Frisby is an author, comedian, singer-songwriter, voiceover artist, self-taught financial commentator, and the creator of the popular Substack, The Flying Frisbee. The main pillar of Dominic's investment philosophy is based on gold and Bitcoin, and he has written extensively on both. He was an early adopter of the idea of real asset protection, writing a book on the role of Bitcoin over 10 years ago. I wanted to get his view on the role of real assets in investment portfolios and how investors might like to think about protecting their capital from fiat currency debasement. Dominic didn't disappoint, and he added in plenty of thoughts on politics and the prospects for liberty, and also some valuable health tips for the over 50s. Have you ever tried hanging from a high bar? I have, and it works for me. Please enjoy my conversation with the Maverick, Dominic Frisby.
Brought to you by Progressive Equity.
Dominic Frisby, what a pleasure. Thanks for joining me on this wet Friday morning.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Can we just start by you telling us a bit about how you became interested in investing and in markets?
Yes, I can. My father and I, in the noughties, were trying to raise the money to put on this musical that he'd written and that I'd collaborated on called Kisses on a Postcard, all about kids evacuated from the cities in World War II. We were told that we needed 5 million quid. And we had a little bit of money, but we were trying to work out how to turn that into 5 million quid. So I started listening to various podcasts and, reading stuff on the internet. And at the time, commodities and gold seemed to be the place to be. And then there were all these very clever, charismatic people talking about this. And I thought I really need to be able to talk to some of these people. And I didn't want to have to pay them their hourly fee to get consultancy advice. So I started a podcast as a means to talk to them. And one of the people that I interviewed was a lady called Merrin Somerset Webb, who was the editor of Money Week at the time. And so she offered me a column writing about commodities for Money Week. And, the more you talk to these people, the more you start speculating in these worlds and investing in these worlds. So that's how I got into it.
You must have been a very early pioneer of the podcast then.
I was. And then I stopped. And then I got this job hosting the Virgin podcast, and it was going great guns. And then I interviewed somebody about climate change, and then The Guardian wrote this piece, "Why is Richard Branson giving a platform to a climate change denier?" And it created all sorts of internal problems, and they stopped the podcast just at the time when podcasting went massive. And so a little bit of me has always been a little bit bitter that didn't last. But anyway.
You are what I can only describe as a modern-day Renaissance man. I think I probably read one of your books, but I didn't really realise the extent of what you were up to and what you were doing until you wrote the song about Brexit. That hit my radar screen, and then I realised that you were a stand-up comedian, you were a singer-songwriter, you were an investment journalist, finance journalist, a filmmaker, an actor. Then I started listening to Times Radio and could never get rid of your voice.
Sorry about that.
As a voiceover artist. Every other documentary, there seems to be your voice in there somewhere. And now you're a health influencer. I guess the question is, when you're doing the application for home insurance and they want to know your occupation, how do you describe yourself?
Writer.
Okay.
I wouldn't call myself a health influencer. That's completely happened by accident. But most things in my life have happened by accident. I lost a lot of weight, 22 kilos or something, 45 pounds. But not only have I lost weight, I've got into really good shape. And I just posted a before and after picture, and I wrote a thread about what I'd done. And it just went absolutely viral. It got 11 million views the last time I'd looked. It just really hit a nerve, I think. And then everyone's been going to me, "Oh, there's a shortage of fitness gurus for the over 50s. You should do this." And then I wrote another post about sleep. And I wrote another one about seed oils. And on my Substack, I've got a very popular Substack, The Flying Frisby, and a lot of people read it. Normally, you get the big conversions from free reader to paid reader, if you go, and I'm about to tip this amazing stock that's going to go up 10 times and everyone wants to read about it. But I've got more conversions with, and this is how I sleep well, and this is why you should avoid seed oils, than I got with any financial thing I'd ever done. So if the market wants it, Dominic Frisby will provide it.
The market is telling you something there.
But there are people who know way more about it than me. But yeah.
Have they lived the experience?
Well, that's the thing. Normally I sort of hide behind a keyboard a little bit, but I think it was the posting of the pictures before and after that really chimed with people.
The thing I did pick up from you was in my exercise regime is I've started shoulder mobility exercises, and I try and hang myself every day, not literally, but from a high bar. And I swear, it's transformational.
It's amazing. More people, I think, have seen me. I did a video where I hanged from a bar, or I hung from a bar for 2 minutes while talking about the benefits of hanging from a bar. And, I'm now the dead hang guy.
Yeah.
And more people have seen that than like all the effort I put into comic songs and all the rest of it. But I had this problem with my neck, and it was a classic tech neck I had a motorcycle crash when I was younger, and I've always had neck issues. But, it was just spending too long looking at a computer, sticking my neck out. And I got a trapped nerve somewhere in my neck or my shoulder.
Me too.
Loads of osteopathy, and trapped nerves are painful.
Yeah.
And then I don't even know why I did it. I'm only 5'9" and I'm about 11 stone now. So I'm a good build for dead hangs. If you're like 6'4" and maybe 15 stone or something, it's much harder. And they are so good for you. In terms of the amount of time you put into what you get out of it, I've never known an exercise as good.
Well, you got me onto it, and I'm a big fan, a big convert, so thank you.
And it's sorted out your neck and shoulders and all that?
I have a neck and shoulder issue, and it expresses itself in the form of a recurring migraine. I'm a swimmer, and so shoulder mobility is important, and it helps in that regard as well. So, yeah. And
I'm sure you know all about this, but you know about the relationship between blue light and migraines?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Try wearing those orange glasses.
I have, yeah. I wear tinted glasses. I've tried all that. I'm a big believer that one's worldview shapes your approach to how you invest your money, because you're basically taking a view of the future. And to take a view of the future, you have to assess where the world is today and how it's developed. Can you just talk about how your worldview has shaped your investment philosophy?
Well, I agree that your worldview can shape your investment philosophy, and that is a danger, because often, particularly your political, if you let your politics get in the way, it can lead you to make bad decisions. But in terms of my general, this isn't necessarily a political thing, but I'm a big gold bug. I'm a big Bitcoin bug. I think fiat money is responsible for so many of the ills in our society, most of all the inequality gap. And I actually think I'm doing a morally right thing by using Bitcoin and gold as a savings vehicle rather than fiat. So there's the moral case for those investments. But I also think, I look at the world and I look at the Labour government, and Rachel Reeves is already U-turning like mad, and we haven't even had the first budget yet. She's done about 73 U-turns, and Keir Starmer, was going into the election, was Captain Flip-Flop. So, they've carried on the incompetence of the previous administration, different personnel, but the incompetence has stayed there.
Yes.
And I think it's a problem of being, Thatcher used to talk about first principles, and it's a problem of a lack of first principles that leads them into all the U-turn and allowing themselves to be guided by whatever the media outrage is that day. So that is bad investing. You need first principles. But in any case, they are going to spend more money than they are going to receive in tax revenue. That is for sure, because they don't understand that lowering tax rates actually increases revenue. This is a lesson that leaders seem to fail to understand since forever.
We've been told that the U-turn on non-DOMs.
Yeah, I was thinking of just that.
So higher taxes lead to no revenue or no increase in revenue, but one wonders whether they can make the evolutionary step to understand the counter to that. The lower tax rates leads to higher revenue. But I think that's too big a step for this government to take, I would imagine.
The other thing is I don't think it's all about the revenue. I think it's also about control and attacking the rich and getting elected. And the private school thing, the VAT on school fees, was not for the revenue. They say it's for the revenue, but it was not. It's because 93% of kids go to state school and there's a huge culture of politics of envy, and it was done to gain popularity. It was not done for the revenue, because actually it's going to cost the government more. The VAT they get from the school fees will not compensate for the increase in the burden on the state sector. So I don't believe it is always about revenue. It should be. The sensible thing for a leader to do is to govern with lower taxes as possible so that the people are as free as possible. But that is not the socialist mentality.
So coming back to this idea of first principles thinking, I guess one of the first principles of thinking about finance and investing is money. And what is money?
It's not taught. And if you think money, people just think means of exchange. Oh, well, you're not going to use your gold to go and buy a cup of coffee, or you're not going to go into Tesco's with a gold sovereign. Anyway, there's three functions of money. Okay. 4, standard of deferred payment, medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account. But really, the two that matter are store of value and medium of exchange. And fiat money is perfectly good as a medium of exchange within countries. Once you start crossing borders with fiat money, it gets expensive. But within countries, it's perfectly good medium of exchange because of all the evolutions that have happened with fintech. But fiat money is a crap store of value. You know, there are much better savings vehicles than fiat money. Gold is one, Bitcoin is another. So, you know, that's the basic thing that people forget. But just coming back to your earlier question, why do I like gold and Bitcoin? Because this government is going to spend a lot more than they take in tax. And the way they're going to meet the shortfall is to debase the currency. And it's not just this government, it's every government in the world. You know, we are in an era of currency debasement. I looked at the gold chart yesterday. Gold touched £2,000 an ounce. It was below £200 an ounce when Gordon Brown sold. It was about £160 an ounce. So gold has gone up 10 times in 25 years, 10 times. But it's not gold that's gone up 10 times, because gold is exactly the same as it was. It's the pound that has lost more than 90% of its purchasing power in those 25 years. So you need to hold things that keep their purchasing power. And it's going to lose in the next 20 years another 90% plus of its purchasing power. It's going to happen faster because this decline in the purchasing power of fiat is accelerating. And so that informs my investment worldview that you need to use other forms of money as your savings vehicle.
You were an early gold bug, and then you were an early Bitcoiner. I think you wrote your book on Bitcoin about 7 or 8 years ago.
2014.
Okay, wow.
It was published in 2014. I wrote it in 2013.
10 years ago. That is early. How do you view the two today? I mean, is Bitcoin just a digital expression of what gold is?
Well, gold is less volatile than Bitcoin. Gold will fall less than Bitcoin. It won't go up as much as Bitcoin. It depends on your time frame and your temperament and all the rest of it. I have a thing in the Flying Frisby, in the newsletter, the Substack. We have a thing called the Dolce Far Niente portfolio, which literally translates as the sweetness of doing nothing. You may not know this, but one of the best performing investors in the UK at the moment is the Dead.
The Dead, yes. Yes. I think Fidelity did a study on it and found out they outperformed all their professional fund managers.
And it's because they don't trade, they do nothing. So this is the idea of the Dolce Far Niente portfolio. We have a diversified portfolio around a few assets, and we reallocate as little as possible to have a portfolio that you don't need to keep worrying about. But we have a large allocation to gold. We have an allocation to equities. We have an allocation to bonds and wealth preservation, which I don't really think that highly of because it hasn't done anything. But, you know, I recognize that there is a need for those kind of things. And we have an allocation to Bitcoin. And we have quite a large allocation to energy as well, uranium and oil and gas and coal. But the idea of that is it's a portfolio where you have to do very little. And, you know, that's why to hold gold and to hold Bitcoin. You know, the arguments for gold and Bitcoin, the decline in the purchasing power of fiat money, are very similar. Gold is the most analog asset there is. And Bitcoin is very, very digital. You know, you won't use Bitcoin in the real world. And, you know, there is digital gold where you can transfer ownership of gold held in a vault, but gold is a physical thing. So they're just very, very different. And Bitcoin stands a chance of becoming the default payment or the default cash system of the internet, but also the default savings vehicle of the internet. It's more convenient a lot of the time. It's so convenient for cross-border payments. I can't believe more people don't use it for that. and it's a brilliant savings vehicle. So there's an argument for owning both, and there's a lot of crossover in the Venn diagram, but they are not one and the same. Bitcoin is digital and gold is analog.
So which do you have the larger exposure to personally?
In the Dolce Far Niente, we have 15% in gold and 5% in Bitcoin.
Okay. Obviously, we've seen El Salvador adopted as legal tender. There's quite a few other developing countries where it's becoming more widely adopted. I guess the next step is you'll see more mainstream sovereign wealth funds starting to allocate to it.
It's possible. To be honest, after El Salvador, I thought a lot of other countries would do it much more quickly than they have. The problem is that Bitcoin is divisive. It's divisive over generations. I'm 55. Used to go to Bitcoin conferences, I'd be the oldest person there. If I go to gold conferences, I'd be the youngest person there. So the older generation like gold and the younger generation like Bitcoin. And as the younger generation gets older, Bitcoin will just become more and more normalized. But in terms of sovereign adoption, all this stuff that you hear about Asian nations, Russia, the BRICS, they want a payment system that bypasses the dollar, blah, blah, blah. All of that, you're just like, well, it's there. Just use Bitcoin. What's the problem? And they don't. And they talk about these blockchain-based systems that they're all designing. And it's like, well, it's already there, Bitcoin. But I think they want something over which they have more control. And They don't like the fact that they don't have control over Bitcoin. It's a very government instinct to want control. Anyway, so that will slow down the Bitcoin thing. The generational thing will slow it down, and the wanting control thing will slow it down. One of the main reasons to be bullish about gold at the moment is that there's this thing, the M Bridge, and all these new payment systems that are being devised amongst the BRICS countries and in Asia. But all the countries that are devising these payment systems and, de-dollarizing, they're all buying shed loads of gold. And there's central banks that are pushing up the gold price. So something's going on. And the fact that we're not even talking about it at the political level in this country is just extraordinary. But, we're just clueless. But anyway, Bitcoin is there and it's a ready-made solution, but they might want to design their own system rather than have the Bitcoin one. The de-dollarization is a big theme. There is a political will to de-dollarize, and political wills can be strong things.
Absolutely. So just moving back onto gold then, you've done a deep dive into the history of gold and
I'm writing a book about it at the moment.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. When's that coming out?
Hopefully August next year.
Okay.
I've submitted the first draft already and they've given me a load of rewrites to do.
So mark the date for when the peak price for gold in the cycle before it goes out.
I mean, I keep telling them, get it out now while there's a bull market.
These things can go on for longer than you think.
Publishing takes a long time.
I can imagine.
The lead times are huge.
So what are the things you've learned about the gold industry and the gold market that should be relevant for us and for people who, mainstream finance, not just mainstream UK politicians, have sort of kept gold in a little curiosity box for a long time. Now it's forcing its way into more sort of public recognition.
What I've learned is own gold, don't touch gold miners. Gold miners is just terrible. They're starting to move at the moment, actually, but they are just the worst investment class. They're great when they go up. Gold's gone from 1,600 to 2,600 in 3 years, and gold miners have not done anything.
Yeah, I think as Duncan McInnes pointed out, over the 11 years from the peak of the last gold mining bull market, the gold miners are down 40%, and in a period when the gold price has doubled.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, if gold miners have been declining relative to gold since 2004, 20 years.
But it can't persist forever, can it? And as you say, they're beginning to start performing, particularly with the oil price weakening. Just hold the physical.
That's my advice.
A wise man once told me that a mine is a big hole in the ground with a liar at the top.
Mark Twain lost all his money speculating. It was actually silver stocks he lost his money in. But
did he?
In the Comstock Lode silver rush in 1862. And he became an alcoholic and he started drinking, well, maybe not an alcoholic, but he started drinking heavily. And whenever he would go into the bar, he would shout out Mark Twain to put 2 marks up against his name for the 2 whiskies he was about to drink. And the saying Mark Twain actually came from his time on the riverboats when they would shout Mark Twain when the riverboats were in 2 fathoms, which would be 12 feet of depth of water, then the paddles could turn. But he used to shout that out when he went into this bar, and that's how it became his pen name.
Interesting.
But I own a lot of gold miners, and I've done loads of research on them, and I feel I'm a fairly good judge of a good one, and they're still been crap. And, it's a source of frustration to me and my readers, and that's why I just slag them off. But we do actually own them.
So what's your answer to the classic Merrin question on her podcast, 10 years, gold or Bitcoin?
Bitcoin.
Yeah, has to be, doesn't it?
Over the next 10 years? Yeah, I think so. I think gold in 10 years' time could easily be north of $5,000. But if gold doubles from here, Bitcoin will triple or quadruple or quintuple or something.
And then you just got to check your frame of reference and understand what that implies for the purchasing power of the dollar and the pound.
Yeah, it'll just be every year it'll lose 10% of its purchasing power.
Well, you've definitely been ahead of the game. Just looking at the books that you've written, you were discussing the end of the nation state in 2011, 2012, something like that. Maybe earlier than that, but the prospects of Bitcoin becoming money in 2014. Where do you think things go from here? One of the things I remember you saying in Life After the State was that we would, of course, not see a libertarian government in our lifetime. Now, I'm probably referring to the UK, where it's hard to disagree with you. But, of course, this guy, Javier Milei in Argentina, what do you make of what's going on there?
I don't know that much about it. It's very, very exciting. He's an absolute star. His arguments are clear. His first principles are there for all to see. And I mean, obviously the purists are going, well, he's not doing this and that. But the reality is always a lot more muddy than idealism. I'm actually going out there next month, hopefully to make a documentary about him. So we'll find out a bit more then.
I watched his address to Davos last year, and earlier this week or last week, I remember his speech to the United Nations, which, as you say, when you just contrast it to the word salad of nonsense that we get from all our elected politicians in the West, it just was clear as day.
Yeah.
What he's doing, if it becomes a movement that it can be replicated, could be as significant for the emergent world, if you like, could be as significant as the collapse of the Soviet Union.
I agree. If his experiment works, it will legitimize it in other countries. You can rest assured it'll be resisted, but, governments copy each other. And if somebody else has done it and it's worked, it takes the career risk out of saying we should do that.
Mm.
It's interesting. I think libertarianism is the belief system of the internet. It's the religion of the internet, or the political philosophy of the internet, free speech and all that. Whereas most of the West lives in sort of technocratic, bureaucratic, whatever, social democracies. But if you look at the day he gave that speech in Davos, I looked on the WEF website, and the Milei speech, which was a brilliant speech in terms of its content and the fact that he was saying it to people in Davos. But in terms of actually his speech, he just read his notes. He didn't look up. Yeah. He just read out his notes. It wasn't a real showman speech like he sometimes gives. But that speech got, I forget the exact number, it was something like 5 million views on the WF website that day. And the next most watched speech was Emmanuel Macron, which had 21,000. So that gives you an idea. Now, the problem is, the internet's dispersed, and in order to win a majority, you have to get this number of votes in this borough and this number of votes in that seat and all the rest of it. So if the internet voted, there was a global vote on the internet, libertarianism would win. But because of the way representative democracies are set up, it can't. But it can still happen gradually.
And it can when things go badly wrong. And
it's extraordinary that he was able to win in Argentina. The problem is 40% of Argentina is Peronist, but that 40% is totally disunified. And Milei took advantage of that. If he's successful, then he'll grow in popularity. But if the Peronists get their act together, they could easily take him out.
Sure. I mean, that's the nature of politics, isn't it? To your demographic point and the ideology of the internet point, what hasn't been widely reported on, but I believe to be the case, that his popularity is much higher among younger people than people of middle age and our age. And that can be replicated elsewhere. And that has the basis of a true revolution in terms of revolutionary thinking. And to the point on actually executing a libertarian agenda. I mean, he managed it because 80 years, 100 years of Peronism, which is basically authoritative socialism, just demonstrably failed repeatedly. That is, a guiding light, surely, of what the rest of the Western world is heading towards with the state of our public finances.
100%. I was having this conversation at dinner last night, and this guy was saying, no, woke peaked in 2021. If you look at, there was all these measures of woke, and they found that it's peaked in 2021, and they used it, for example, they find typical woke words like inclusion and diversity. And if you look at their use, they peaked in 2021 and it's been declining since 2021, and woke's losing the argument and blah, blah, blah. And you go, okay, fine. But then you look at woke mentality, which, for example, is very, very green energy, anti-fossil fuels. And then you look at Miliband's energy policy and you realize that woke mentality has infiltrated, UK now pays the highest electricity prices in the world.
Yeah.
It's nuts. If you're going to grow an economy, you need cheap energy. We're just making energy so expensive for ourselves, and we're not going to make any difference to climate change anyway. So it's just stupid. And in any case, all the green energy that we consume is incredibly environmentally harmful. When you build a wind turbine, those huge concrete structures that they're built on stay in the ground forever. And then when the wind turbine, the amount of oil to lubricate it requires oil, and then the things don't decompose when you stop using them. They are environmentally harmful, not to mention all the bird life they kill. And then they're putting them in the sea. And
the big ones require diesel generators to start them up.
So that is making energy, that is both environmentally damaging and making energy really, really expensive. But that is a woke policy that has just become totally, totally institutionalized. And it is a socialist policy. It cannot exist without truckloads of subsidy. If it was all completely market-based, we wouldn't have it. And so that's an example of the socialization of energy, or the wokeification of energy, or whatever word you want to use.
Yeah, and coming back to the Argentina example, the opening up of the shale opportunity in Argentina is supposedly, the opportunity there is geologically greater than the shale opportunity in the US.
Oh, is it? I didn't know that. Well, good.
Do you follow Doomberg on Substack?
I read his stuff, but I get cut off. I'm not a subscriber.
I'd thoroughly recommend it. If you're into uranium, nuclear energy, fossil fuels, don't know how much it is. It's one of the few that I do subscribe to.
Yeah.
It's thoroughly entertaining and written very, very well. I love your output. It's such a wide-ranging use of media. I just think it's brilliant. I loved your Kraftwerk take of the World Economic Forum on CBDCs. What sort of advice can you give sort of budding Substackers, content creators, influencers in terms of actually monetizing stuff or being able to...
My advice is this. Don't do what I do and do a million different things. Specialize in one thing. But
seriously?
Yeah. I mean, it's fine if you want to do lots of different things, and I do them because I'm interested. People aren't interested in the guy who's pretty good at everything. Okay. They're interested in the top guy in this field. They want the funniest comedian in the world. They want the best financial advisor. They want the number one oil expert. They don't want a guy who's good at most things.
So given all the wide variety of things that you've done, to the point, I guess, of being a generalist or, having a wide spread of interests, what would you like most to be remembered for?
I'm really, really enjoying my Substack, and I put a lot of effort into it, and I'm really proud of it. But my number one thing is my comic songs, and I want to take those to another level.
How do you do that?
I keep producing more of them, and I keep doing more and more gigs, and people come to the gigs, and gradually you build up a following, and suddenly, hopefully, something will happen and I'll be playing stadiums. That won't happen, but...
You remind me of sort of modern day Tom Lehrer with a slightly different political bent.
Yeah, Tom Lehrer was great.
Yeah.
And he stopped. He just did his songs for a bit and he was massive. And then he was like, no, I want to go back to being a professor.
Yeah.
I really admire that.
I think he's still alive today.
I believe so, yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed the chat. I think people will find it very illuminating with your views on everything. So how do people find out more about you? You've obviously got your books, your Substack. You seem to be everywhere on social media. Once I started following you, you appear everywhere. But just give people a flavour of how best to find out about what you're doing, how they can come and see you perform, all that kind of stuff?
If you're interested in my comic songs, then go to dominicfrisby.com. There's my newsletter there, and just type your name in. It's free. And every time I do a new song or I've got a gig or something, it all goes out to my mailing list before it goes anywhere else on the internet. And if you're interested in my financial musings and my health transforming stuff, then you want to go to the Flying Frisby, which is free to join. And there's also a paid option if you want to upgrade, but just go to the free one to start with. Type your name in, theflyingfrisby.com. That is my Substack, and I write 2 articles a week, one on a Sunday and one midweek, usually on a Wednesday.
And they're excellent. Thank you for that. You've got a book coming out next year.
Next year, but I'll promote
Working title?
Don't know.
Okay.
The Secret History of Gold.
Sounds like a great read. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
Brought to you by Progressive Equity.